The marble floors of Sterling Industries' executive floor had never felt colder than the moment 12-year-old Sarah Chen stumbled through its glass doors, clutching her late mother's wrinkled resume. CEO Marcus Sterling's laughter echoed through the lobby as he towered over her, making a show of tearing the paper in half while his executives chuckled nervously behind him. Only 14-year-old James, the janitor's son who was helping his father that day, noticed the jade pendant around Sarah's neck, identical to the one in the faded photograph on his father's desk from 20 years ago at the Shanghai orphanage. What devastating secret about Marcus Sterling's past was James's father keeping? And why had he spent 2 decades working as a janitor in this building, watching, waiting? If you believe in justice and want to see more stories of kindness triumphing over cruelty, please subscribe to our channel for weekly tales that will warm your heart and restore your faith in humanity. James Lin's fingers traced the worn edges of his cleaning cart, eyes fixed on the shattered pieces of resume that now littered the pristine lobby floor. The corporate elite had already dispersed, their leather shoes clicking against marble as they retreated to their glass offices, leaving behind the echo of their forced laughter. His father, Li Wei, was methodically sweeping up the torn paper, his movements precise and dignified despite the fluorescent maintenance vest that hung loosely on his frame. "Leave it, Ba," James whispered in Mandarin, moving to help. "I'll take care of it." Li Wei's eyes, always careful and watchful, met his son's. "Every piece of paper tells a story, James, even the torn ones." His father's English was perfect, as always, though he spoke softly enough that only James could hear. The teen knelt, gathering the fragments, and noticed the header. Chen, Michelle, International Law. The handwriting was elegant, confident, just like the woman's daughter had been, despite her trembling hands. Later that evening, as James helped his father clean the executive floor, he couldn't shake the image of the jade pendant the girl had worn. It was hauntingly familiar, an exact match to the one in the photograph he'd discovered last month while organizing his father's small desk in their apartment. That photo, yellowed with age, showed a group of children outside a Shanghai orphanage. His father stood among them, wearing a suit instead of a janitor's uniform, and around each child's neck hung a jade pendant identical to Sarah Chen's. "Ba," James began, watching his father's methodical movement as he polished Sterling's vast desk. "The girl today? Some things take time, son." Li Wei's voice carried a weight James had grown accustomed to, but never fully understood. 20 years, sometimes, but time reveals all truths. James thought about the newspaper clippings he'd found hidden behind the photograph. Headlines in Chinese that he'd carefully translated: "Shanghai Orphanage Investigation Halted. Prominent Prosecutor Disappears. American Businessman Cleared of All Charges." The vacuum's hum filled the silence between them as James watched his father work. Li Wei moved with the same precision he used when helping James with calculus homework or teaching him traditional characters on Sunday mornings. Nothing about him suggested a man who had once worn tailored suits and argued cases in Shanghai's highest courts. Nothing except his eyes, which never stopped watching, measuring, waiting. "Is that why we're here?" James finally asked. "Why we've been here all this time?" Li Wei straightened, his hand resting on Sterling's leather chair. For a moment, something fierce flickered across his face, the shadow of the man from the photograph. Every empire built on lies must eventually fall. "James, we just need to be patient and present when the moment comes." James nodded, understanding now why his father had insisted he learn both languages perfectly, why they spent evenings studying law books for fun, why Li Wei took such care to be invisible yet indispensable to Sterling Industries. As they finished their rounds, James collected one last piece of Sarah Chen's mother's resume from behind a potted plant. In the security camera's reflection, he caught a glimpse of his father's face as the older man looked toward Sterling's office. It was the face of a man who had traded his suit for a uniform, his prosecutor's badge for a mop, all to wait for the perfect moment. James carefully folded the resume fragment and slipped it into his pocket. Tomorrow, he would begin his own investigation into Sarah Chen, the jade pendant, and the 20-year-old secret that had brought them all together in this tower of glass and lies. The key stuck in the lock of apartment 4B, just as it had every day since the funeral. Sarah Chen jiggled it with practiced patience, the same way her mother had taught her. Everything needs a gentle touch, Michelle used to say, even stubborn. Doors. The thought brought fresh tears, but Sarah blinked them away. She couldn't afford tears anymore. Inside, the small apartment felt emptier than ever. Medical bills still covered the kitchen table, their red final notice stamps glaring. In the afternoon light, Sarah's fingers instinctively found the jade pendant around her neck, its smooth surface cool against her skin. Her mother had given it to her on her 10th birthday, 2 years ago, before the cancer had taken everything. "It's more than just jewelry," Michelle had explained, her eyes distant with memory. "It's a promise of protection from a time when promises meant the difference between life and death." She never explained further, changing the subject whenever Sarah asked about its origin. The apartment still smelled faintly of her mother's ginger tea, though it had been 3 weeks since Michelle had last brewed any. Sarah moved through their familiar routine, checking the mail, more bills, starting her homework, mathematics, her mother's favorite, and preparing dinner. The last of the casseroles from sympathetic neighbors. As she worked through her algebra problems, Sarah's mind wandered back to Sterling Industries. She'd thought, naively perhaps, that taking her mother's old resume there might lead to something. Michelle had been a respected international lawyer before they'd moved to America, before she'd gotten sick and had to take whatever work she could find. The resume represented who she'd really been, not the exhausted woman working 3 part-time jobs at the end. A knock at the door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Liu from next door holding another casserole. The elderly woman had been checking on her daily, ever since learning Sarah was staying alone, while Child Services processed her case. "You're too thin," Mrs. Liu declared, shuffling into the kitchen. "Your mother—" She paused, setting down the dish. "Michelle would want you to eat properly." Sarah nodded, accepting both the food and the concern. "Thank you, Mrs. Liu. I'm okay." "Really? The social worker is coming tomorrow to discuss options." Mrs. Liu's eyes narrowed. "Options? What options?" "You stay here, with me watching over you. I already told them I can be your guardian. Your mother did the same for my Mei back in Shanghai 20 years ago. Now, it's my turn." This was news to Sarah. "My mother helped your daughter?" The older woman's face clouded. "Ah, that was a different time. Your mother was very brave then. Very brave." She touched Sarah's pendant briefly, her expression unreadable. "Some stories are better left in the past." After Mrs. Liu left, Sarah pulled out the wooden box where she kept her mother's few personal items. Among them was a small red notebook, its pages filled with Michelle's elegant handwriting, mostly case notes from her law practice in Shanghai. Sarah had never paid much attention to it before, but now she noticed dates, names, and something. That made her heart skip. A sketch of a jade pendant, identical to hers, with Chinese characters she couldn't read. A siren wailed outside, and Sarah moved to the window. From 12 stories up, she could see the gleaming tower of Sterling Industries in the distance. Marcus Sterling's cruel laughter echoed in her memory, but something else surfaced too. The way the janitor's son had looked at her pendant, the recognition in his eyes. Her mother had always said that coincidences were God's way of remaining anonymous. But Sarah was beginning to suspect that what had happened today at Sterling Industries was no coincidence at all. The jade pendant felt heavier around her neck, weighted with secrets she was only beginning to understand. In the growing darkness, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would find the janitor's son, if anyone could help her understand the connection. Between her mother's past, the pendant, and Sterling Industries, it would be him. She owed it to her mother's memory to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it had been buried. The night shift at Sterling Industries belonged to Li Wei. In these quiet hours, when the fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song and the cleaning cart's wheels whispered against marble, he shed his janitor's submissive stance. His shoulders straightened, his steps became purposeful, and his eyes, ever watchful, gleamed with the sharp intelligence he usually kept carefully hidden. Tonight was different. Michelle Chen's daughter appearing in the lobby had changed everything. For 20 years, he'd been gathering threads of evidence, patient as a spider weaving its web. Now fate had delivered the one person who could bring it all together. Li Wei pulled on his latex gloves, standard issue for cleaning staff, perfect for leaving no traces, and entered Marcus Sterling's corner office. The executive's desk, a massive slab of mahogany, dominated the room like a titan's altar. Sterling's arrogance was his weakness. He never imagined the night janitor could read the Chinese documents carelessly left in his outbox or understand the significance of the Shanghai shipping manifestos hidden in plain sight. The sound of voices in the hallway made Li Wei freeze. At this hour, the floor should have been empty. The Chen woman's brat showing up here wasn't a coincidence. Sterling's voice carried through the door, sharp with anger. Someone's been talking. Check the orphanage records again. Make sure nothing connects us to Shanghai. It's been 20 years, another voice responded. But the statute of limitations doesn't apply to human trafficking, Sterling snapped, and that bastard prosecutor disappeared with proof. He's out there somewhere, waiting. I can feel it. Li Wei's heart thundered in his chest, but his hands remained steady as he continued cleaning, playing the role of the invisible servant. The door opened, and Sterling burst in, phone pressed to his ear. He barely glanced at Li Wei. Listen to me, Sterling hissed into the phone. I don't care what it costs. Find out who's been accessing the old files and get me everything you can on Michelle Chen's daughter. That pendant she was wearing, I know those jade pieces. They were supposed to have been destroyed. Li Wei kept his head down, methodically, wiping surfaces, but his mind raced. In his pocket, a small camera disguised as a pen captured every word. 20 years of patience had taught him to be prepared for moments like this. Sterling ended his call and turned to Li Wei with the same dismissive glance he'd given him countless times before. You, make sure you clean under everything tonight and empty all the shredders. Yes, sir, very thorough, sir, Li Wei mumbled, letting his accent thicken, playing the role that had kept him safe all these years. After Sterling left, Li Wei moved quickly. The shredder beside Sterling's desk was full, the man's paranoia working in Li Wei's favor. He carefully emptied it into a separate bag, one he would piece together later in the secret room of his apartment, adding to the mountain of evidence he'd accumulated over 2 decades. In the bottom drawer of Sterling's desk, behind a false panel Li Wei had discovered years ago, lay a folder marked Shanghai Solutions. Inside were photographs that still haunted his dreams. Children lined up, like merchandise, jade pendants around their necks, markers for potential buyers. Li Wei had been prosecuting the trafficking ring when Sterling's money had bought him silence, forced him into hiding, into this elaborate long game of patience and pretense. His phone vibrated, a text from James. Dad, Sarah Chen came back. She's waiting in the coffee shop across the street. She's been asking about us. Li Wei allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps it was time for the janitor to finally step out of the shadows. Michelle Chen had sacrificed everything to protect those children 20 years ago. Now her daughter might be the key to finally bringing down the house of lies Sterling had built. He carefully returned everything to its exact position, erasing all traces of his presence. The evidence in his pocket, Sterling's recorded conversation, photos of the documents, would join the rest in his growing arsenal. 20 years of nights like this, gathering proof piece by piece, building an airtight case that would make his sacrifice worth it. As he wheeled his cleaning cart toward the elevator, Li Wei whispered a quiet prayer in Mandarin, not for justice, which he knew would come, but for the strength to protect Sarah Chen. She was now part of this dangerous dance, whether she knew it or not. Just like her mother before her, she had stumbled into a nest of vipers. The elevator doors closed on the empty office floor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. Li Wei straightened his janitor's vest and allowed himself to feel, just for a moment, like the prosecutor he had once been. Soon, very soon, Marcus Sterling would learn that some crimes cannot be buried, no matter how much money you throw at them. The public library's ancient computer hummed as James typed "Shanghai Orphanage Scandal 2004" into the search bar. Around him, the evening silence was broken only by the occasional turning of pages and the soft clicking of keyboards. He'd told his father he was studying for finals, and in a way he was, studying a history that had shaped both their lives without him knowing it. The first few results were useless, generic stories about various orphanages. But then, buried on page 6 of the search results, a headline caught his eye. "International Adoption Scandal Rocks Shanghai Legal Community." The article was mostly in Chinese, but James's years of Sunday language lessons made the characters dance with meaning. Prominent prosecutor Li Wei Chen disappeared during high-profile trafficking investigation. American business interests implicated, evidence vanishes, case dismissed amid corruption allegations. James's hands trembled as he read his father's real name for the first time, Li Wei Chen. Not Li Wei Lin, the name they'd used since coming to America. The article showed a photograph of his father standing on the courthouse steps, wearing a tailored suit and the fierce expression of a man pursuing justice. Beside him stood a younger Michelle Chen, her face set with the same determination her daughter had shown in Sterling's lobby. Using the library's printer, James carefully made copies of everything he could find. Each article added another piece to the puzzle. The orphanage had been a front for a trafficking operation, moving children through a network of fake adoptions. The jade pendants were markers, identifying which children were available. His father and Sarah's mother had been building a case against the entire network when everything fell apart. A new search revealed more: records of Marcus Sterling's business ventures in Shanghai during the same period. Company photos showing him at charity events at the very same orphanage. Financial records indicating massive transfers to offshore accounts right before the case collapsed. "You shouldn't dig too deeply into old graves," a quiet voice said in Mandarin. James spun around to find Mrs. Liu, their elderly neighbor, standing behind him. She glanced at the articles spread across the desk, her eyes knowing. "Some ghosts are better left undisturbed." "Mrs. Liu, what are you doing here?" She settled into the chair beside him, her movements careful and deliberate. "I volunteer here Tuesday evenings, but perhaps this is not coincidence." She touched one of the photographs, her finger resting on a jade pendant visible around a child's neck. "Your father was a great man in Shanghai, a hero to many families. Were you part of this?" Mrs. Liu's eyes grew distant. "My Mei was one of the children your father saved before everything went wrong. Michelle Chen helped us escape to America. That's why I've been watching over Sarah." She pulled something from her bag, a jade pendant identical to Sarah's. "Some of us kept these as remembrance and as evidence. Each pendant has a number carved on the back corresponding to records your father protected." James's mind raced. That's why he's been working at Sterling Industries all these years. He's been gathering proof. "Patience is a weapon, child. Your father taught me that." Mrs. Liu stood slowly. "Sarah came asking questions today. She's beginning to pull at threads that powerful people want to keep buried. She will need protection." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tonight, Marcus Sterling made 3 calls to Shanghai. Old ghosts are waking up." She placed a small key on the desk. "Safety deposit box, Central Bank, box 2044. Michelle Chen left something there for her daughter. Make sure Sarah gets it before Sterling's people do." After Mrs. Liu left, James stared at the key, understanding flooding through. Him? His father hadn't taken this janitor's job for revenge or even justice alone. He'd maintained his post as a guardian, watching over the evidence, protecting the survivors who had made it to America. Patient, vigilant, waiting for the moment when all the pieces would align. James gathered the articles and the key, his movements now carrying the same deliberate care he'd observed in his father all these years. Sarah wasn't just some girl with a coincidental connection to their past. She was the key to everything, the daughter of his father's former colleague, carrying proof of the trafficking operation around her neck without even knowing it. Tomorrow, he would find her. Together, they would open that safety deposit box and unleash 2 decades of carefully preserved truth. But tonight, he needed to warn his father about Sterling's calls to Shanghai. The game they'd been playing all these years was about to become much more dangerous. As he left the library, James touched the jade pendant his father had given him last birthday, understanding now why he'd been made to promise never to wear it outside their apartment. Every piece of jade in this story was a key to a lock that powerful men wanted to keep closed forever. But locks, his father had taught him, were only as strong as their secrets. Golden Lotus Restaurant hummed with the lunch rush as Sarah tied her waitress apron with trembling fingers. It was her first day, a job that had appeared almost miraculously after her humiliation at Sterling Industries. Mr. Wong, the owner, had hired her on the spot when she'd mentioned her mother's name, his eyes showing a flash of recognition that Sarah was learning to watch for. "Your mother was a good woman," he'd said quietly. "She helped my family when we first came to America. This job, it is a small repayment." The restaurant sat in the shadow of Sterling Tower, its red and gold awning a defiant splash of color against the corporate gray. Sarah had noticed the janitor's son watching from across the street as she'd entered for her interview. He'd pretended to be cleaning the building's windows, but his eyes followed her with an intensity that felt protective rather than threatening. "Table 5 needs menus," Jenny, the senior waitress, called out. "And watch out for the suits from Sterling's. They've been hassling Mr. Wong about selling the place." As if summoned by Jenny's warning, Marcus Sterling himself walked in, flanked by 2 executives. The restaurant fell quiet, conversations dropping to whispers. Sterling's eyes found Sarah immediately, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Well, well," he drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear, "if it isn't the little girl with the torn resume. Serving dumplings now, are we? How appropriate." Sarah's hands clenched around her order pad, her mother's voice echoing in her memory. "Never let them see your fear. Fear is their currency." She straightened her spine, touching the jade pendant for courage. "Welcome to Golden Lotus," she said clearly. "Would you like to see our menu?" Sterling's eyes narrowed at her composure. "Actually, I'm here to speak with Wong about his lease. Seems there are some health code concerns we need to discuss. Our health rating is perfect," Mr. Wong's voice cut through the tension. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his chef's apron pristine, his stance unflinching. "As you well know, Mr. Sterling, we passed inspection last week." "Inspections can be reopened," one of Sterling's executives suggested smoothly. "Mistakes are often found on second look." The front door chimed and Li Wei entered with his cleaning cart. "Pardon, emergency maintenance," he mumbled, his accent thick. "Leak in ceiling, very dangerous. Health violation if not fixed immediately." Sarah watched in fascination as the janitor she'd barely noticed yesterday positioned himself between Sterling's group and Mr. Wong, his movements appearing random but somehow creating a barrier. Through the front window, she glimpsed James speaking urgently into a phone. Sterling's face darkened. "This isn't over, Wong. Everything has a price. Everyone has a price." His gaze lingered on Sarah's pendant. "Some prices are higher than others." After they left, Sarah noticed Li Wei carefully folding a napkin he'd picked up from Sterling's table, one where the executive had sketched something while talking. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah saw none of the servile demeanor he'd shown moments ago. His gaze was sharp, calculating, and somehow familiar. "Your mother wore the same expression," Mr. Wong said quietly beside her, making her jump. "When she was building a case. That man, Li Wei, he is not what he seems." "Did you know my mother well?" Sarah asked, seizing the moment. Mr. Wong wiped his hands on his apron, choosing his words carefully. In Shanghai, before everything changed, your mother was like a shield for many families. She and Prosecutor Chen, they fought dragons. He touched his own neck, where Sarah realized a jade pendant lay hidden under his collar. Some battles leave scars, some leave soldiers still fighting from the shadows. The lunch rush died down, but Sarah's mind was buzzing with questions. She watched Li Wei finish his maintenance work and leave, noting how his path took him past every security camera in the restaurant. James appeared briefly at the window, meeting her eyes with a slight nod before disappearing into the crowd. That evening, as Sarah counted her first day's tips, she found a carefully folded note tucked between the bills. In elegant handwriting, it read, "Your mother protected the truth. Now the truth will protect you. Central Bank, Box 2044. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring your pendant. Zhu Jie." She touched the jade at her neck, remembering how her mother would hold it while deep in thought, as if it contained answers to unspoken questions. Perhaps finally, those questions would be answered. Outside, the shadows of Sterling Tower stretched across the street like grasping fingers, but they no longer seemed as threatening. In their darkness, Sarah sensed watchful allies moving unseen, pieces of a long game finally shifting into place. Her mother had been part of something much bigger than she'd ever imagined. Tomorrow she would begin to understand exactly what that something was. The executive floor's security panel blinked green as James swiped his maintenance access card. His father's years of careful preparation had ensured their after-hours access looked routine. Just another evening of the janitor's son helping with cleanup. But tonight was different. Tonight, they had exactly 22 minutes while Sterling attended a board dinner across town. James's rubber-gloved hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the spots his father had identified over years of patient observation. The false bottom of Sterling's desk drawer yielded nothing new, but the vintage sailing ship model on the credenza held a surprise. Inside its hollow base, James found a USB drive labeled simply Shanghai Assets. His heart pounding, he plugged it into the tablet his father had modified for secure access. Files populated the screen, spreadsheets, photographs, and documents dating back 20 years. One folder caught his eye. Jade Initiative. The first image made his blood run cold. A younger Sterling stood in an ornate office in Shanghai, shaking hands with a man James recognized from his research, Chen Wei-ming, the corrupt orphanage director who had disappeared right after the scandal broke. Between them, on the desk, lay a familiar sight, dozens of jade pendants arranged in neat rows. "Finding what we need?" His father's voice, barely a whisper, made James jump. Li Wei stood in the doorway, his janitor's uniform incongruous with his. Alert, professional stance. "There's something else," James murmured, opening another file. Financial records. Sterling wasn't just involved in the trafficking. He was laundering money through his Shanghai operations. The orphanage was only part of it. Li Wei moved silently to his son's side, studying the screen. "Michelle Chen found these records first," he said softly. "That's why they had to silence her. Cancer is easy to arrange when you have the right connections." James looked up sharply. "You think they—" "Your friend Sarah's mother didn't die by accident." Li Wei's voice carried 2 decades of carefully contained rage. "Sterling's partner in Shanghai specializes in untraceable poisons, slow-acting, natural-looking." A sound in the hallway froze them both. Li Wei quickly assumed his janitor's posture as Charles Wong, Sterling's head of security, passed by the office. The man paused, watching them through the glass walls. "Late night cleaning?" Wong's voice dripped with false casualness. "Yes, sir." "Very thorough. Mr. Sterling's orders," Li Wei mumbled, his accent thick and submissive. James kept his head down, continuing to dust the shelves. After Wong left, they waited 5 tense minutes before resuming their search. In a hidden wall, safe, whose combination Li Wei had memorized from careful observation, they found what they'd been looking for: a leather portfolio filled with original adoption papers. Each document bore the same official stamp and a small jade marker in the corner. Evidence of the real transactions, Li Wei explained, photographing each page with a device disguised as a cleaning spray bottle. Every jade pendant corresponds to a child. The numbers carved on the back match these documents. Sterling kept them as insurance against his partners. James thought of Sarah's pendant, the one she wore so innocently. Her mother's name is on these papers. She was building a case against them. Michelle Chen was my partner in the investigation, Li Wei confirmed, his voice tight with old pain. When Sterling's people came for us, she helped me disappear, took over the case. But they were too powerful. She had to run too, taking what evidence she could. A notification flashed on James's phone, their early warning system showing Sterling's car leaving the restaurant. Li Wei quickly returned everything to its exact position, leaving no trace of their presence. But as they turned to leave, James spotted something glinting behind a bookshelf. Reaching carefully into the narrow space, he retrieved a single jade pendant, identical to Sarah's, but cracked down the middle. Turning it over, he saw numbers carved into the back, matching one of the documents they'd just photographed. "Keep it," Li Wei said after studying the pendant. "That crack tells a story Sterling wouldn't want known. The child who wore this, she didn't survive the journey. Michelle Chen found her, documented everything. That's when our investigation began." They slipped out of the office just as the elevator chimed, announcing Sterling's return. As they pushed their cleaning cart toward the service elevator, James clutched the broken pendant in his pocket. Tomorrow, when he met Sarah at the bank, this would help her understand the true scope of what they were dealing with. "Bah," he whispered as they descended. "How did you stay patient all these years, knowing what they did?" Li Wei's eyes met his. Suns in the elevator's mirrored walls. "Justice is like water, James. It finds its way through the smallest cracks, wearing down the strongest stones. We just had to create enough cracks." The elevator reached the basement, and they stepped out, into the shadows they'd inhabited for so long. But tonight, those shadows felt different. Tonight, they felt like power. Golden Lotus's lunchtime crowd fell silent as Marcus Sterling strode in, flanked not by his usual executives, but by 4 men whose suit jackets couldn't quite hide their militant bearing. Sarah, working the register, felt her jade pendant grow, heavy against her skin, as Sterling's cold eyes fixed on her. Mr. Wong emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron with deliberate calm. The elderly restaurant owner seemed smaller than usual against Sterling's towering presence, but his voice remained steady. "We are not interested in selling, Mr. Sterling, as I have told your lawyers 3 times this week. Perhaps you misunderstand. Feel the situation." Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes as he placed a document on the counter. "This isn't an offer anymore. Your lease has been terminated due to multiple health code violations." "What violations?" Jenny demanded, stepping forward. "We just passed inspection." One of Sterling's men moved to block her, his stance threatening. Through the front window, Sarah noticed James across the street, phone to his ear, speaking urgently. A moment later, Li Wei appeared with his cleaning cart, entering the restaurant as if by coincidence. "Interesting timing," Sterling mused, watching the janitor shuffle in. "Always around when things get complicated, aren't you, Li Wei?" Something in his tone made Sarah's breath catch. The way Sterling emphasized the name felt deliberate, knowing. She saw Li Wei's shoulders tense almost imperceptibly beneath his maintenance vest. "Just cleaning, sir," Li Wei mumbled, but Sarah noticed his cart was positioned between Sterling's men and the restaurant's back exit. Sterling pulled out his phone, displaying a photograph that made Mr. Wong blanch. "Let's discuss the interesting coincidence of how many former Shanghai residents frequent this establishment. How many wear jade pendants under their clothes? How many share certain historical connections?" "You have no power here," Mr. Wong said quietly, reaching beneath his collar to pull out his own jade pendant. Not anymore." Sterling's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "No power? Shall we discuss what happened to Michelle Chen? How a perfectly healthy woman developed such an aggressive, untraceable form of cancer?" The pendant slipped from Sarah's trembling fingers, clattering against the counter. The sound seemed to freeze time itself as every eye in the restaurant fixed on the jade piece. Ah, yes, the daughter's pendant. Sterling reached for it, but Sarah snatched it back, her mother's final words echoing in her memory. Never let them take it. It's not just jewelry. It's truth. Mr. Sterling. Li Wei's voice cut through the tension, his accent suddenly perfect, his posture transforming from submissive to commanding. You should leave. Now. Sterling's eyes widened slightly, recognition dawning. Well, the vanished prosecutor himself. 20 years in hiding, playing janitor in my own building. I must admit, I'm almost impressed. Sarah, Li Wei said, calmly, never taking his eyes off Sterling, show everyone what's engraved on the back of your pendant. With shaking fingers, Sarah turned over the jade piece. There, in tiny, precise characters, was a series of numbers and letters. Mr. Wong gasped, understanding filling his features. Each pendant is a key, Li Wei continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent restaurant. Each number corresponds to records. Records Michelle Chen died protecting. Records that prove everything. You have no proof, Sterling snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Don't I? Li Wei smiled for the first time. Why do you think I spent 20 years as your janitor? Every document you thought was safely hidden, every late-night phone call you made in your empty office, every secret meeting, I was there, watching, recording, waiting. The front door chimed as James entered, followed by Mrs. Liu and Ball and Marfos, dozen other elderly Chinese residents of the neighborhood. Each one wore a jade pendant openly now. Sterling's men shifted uncomfortably, recognizing they were suddenly outnumbered. You see, Mr. Sterling, Li Wei continued, Michelle Chen didn't just give her daughter a pendant. She gave her the final piece of evidence we needed, the one that connects everything. And now, thanks to your greed, your need to tie up loose ends, he gestured around the restaurant. You've brought all the witnesses together yourself. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she finally understood. Her mother hadn't been just a victim, she'd been a warrior, fighting until her last breath. The pendant wasn't just jewelry, it was her final testimony. Sterling's facade cracked. This isn't over, he spat, backing toward the door. You have no idea who you're dealing with. No, Mr. Sterling, Li Wei replied softly. You never knew who you were dealing with, but you're about to find out. After Sterling and his men fled, the restaurant erupted in rapid-fire Mandarin as the elderly witnesses hugged each other, crying and laughing. Sarah felt James's hand slip into hers, warm and reassuring. Your mother would be proud, Li Wei told her gently. She knew this day would come. That's why she chose this restaurant, this neighborhood. She brought us all together, one last time. Sarah clutched her pendant, feeling its weight not as a burden now, but as a shield. A shield forged from 20 years of patience, sacrifice, and undying hope for justice. After the confrontation at Golden Lotus, Li Wei led James and Sarah to their small apartment. The space, usually so carefully maintained in its humble appearance, had transformed. Li Wei pressed his hand against a seemingly solid wall, revealing a hidden room that made both teenagers gasp. The secret space was a testament to 20 years of patient investigation. One wall was covered entirely in photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings, all connected by red strings that created a complex web of evidence. A bank of monitors showed live feeds from various locations in Sterling Tower. Multiple hard drives hummed quietly in the corner. Your mother called this the war room, Li Wei told Sarah softly, running his fingers along a photograph of a younger Michelle Chen. She helped me set it up before Sterling's people got to her. James stared at the wall of evidence, his eyes wide. All these years, every time you said you were organizing your cleaning supplies, I was organizing something else entirely. Li Wei sat down heavily in a worn office chair, his janitor's uniform incongruous against the sophisticated surveillance equipment. It's time you both knew everything. He pulled out an old leather briefcase. Its surface cracked with age. 20 years ago, I was chief prosecutor for Shanghai's Special Investigations Unit. Michelle Chen was my partner. We discovered that the Golden Dragon Orphanage was trafficking children under the guise of international adoptions. Sarah touched her pendant instinctively. Li Wei nodded at the gesture. The jade pendants were their inventory system. Each one has a unique number corresponding to a child's file. Sterling and his Chinese partners use them to track their merchandise. But Michelle, your brilliant mother, she turned their system against them. She began replacing the original pendants with duplicates, each containing microscopically encoded evidence. That's why they killed her, Sarah whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. She knew too much. She knew everything, Li Wei confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. When they came for us, she helped me disappear. We split up the evidence. She took half, I took half. The plan was to rebuild the case from America, where Sterling's influence couldn't reach us. But his network was larger than we anticipated. James moved to the wall of photographs, pointing to a series showing Sterling with various officials. You've been documenting his connections all this time? Every meeting, every dirty deal, every late-night conversation, he thought no one could. Here, Li Wei smiled grimly. Being invisible has its advantages. The mighty rarely notice the man cleaning their floors. He pressed a button on one of the monitors, and Sterling's voice filled the room. The Chen woman's brat is becoming a problem. Handle it like we handled her mother. Sarah's face went pale, but her voice was steady. They're going to try to kill. Me too. No, Li Wei said firmly, standing with the authority of his former office. That's why I finally revealed myself today. We have enough evidence now. With your pendant, the final piece Michelle protected with her life, we can bring down their entire operation. He opened a hidden safe and withdrew a thick file. Tomorrow morning, this evidence will be delivered to federal prosecutors, Interpol, and every major news organization in the country. Sterling's empire is built on lies and murder. By this time tomorrow, those foundations will crumble. Why wait? James asked. Why not do it now? Li Wei's eyes took on a fierce gleam. Because tonight, Sterling is meeting with his partners from Shanghai. They're flying in to discuss damage control after our confrontation at the restaurant. Thanks to our surveillance, we know they're gathering at his private estate. For the first time in 20 years, all the major players will be in one place. He turned to Sarah, his expression softening. Your mother and I used to say that justice is like a tide. You can't force it, but you can wait for the perfect moment when all the elements align. Tonight, the tide finally turns. Sarah stood straighter, her mother's daughter in every way. What do you need me to do? Your pendant, Li Wei explained, contains access codes to Sterling's private servers, codes your mother embedded before she died. While Sterling meets with his partners, we'll use them to download decades of incriminating data. By morning, they'll have nowhere to hide. James moved to stand beside Sarah, their shoulders touching. We'll help. We've been part of this our whole lives without knowing it. We deserve to see it through. Li Wei looked at the two teenagers, his son, raised in secrecy and sacrifice, and Michelle's daughter, carrying her mother's courage and final testimony. They were no longer children to be protected, but allies in a war that had shaped their entire lives. Very well, he said, removing his janitor's vest for the last time. Let me show you how to end this, how to make 20 years of waiting mean something. As night fell over the city, three figures huddled over the monitors, planning the downfall of an empire. Outside, a warm spring rain began to fall, washing away 2 decades of dust and secrets. Tomorrow would bring justice, but tonight would bring truth. And truth, as Michelle Chen had always said, was the most powerful weapon of all. Marcus Sterling's private office on the top floor of Sterling Tower vibrated with barely contained rage as he hurled his crystal whiskey glass against the wall. On every screen in the room, the same headline blazed: Shanghai Orphanage Scandal. Reopened, new evidence links American business executive to child trafficking. Find out who leaked it, he snarled into his phone, and get our people at the networks to kill the story. But for the first time in 20 years, Sterling's calls went unanswered. His media contacts were suddenly unreachable. His political allies' offices returned messages saying they were looking into the situation. Even his own board members were suspiciously absent from the emergency meeting he'd called. Charles Wong, his head of security, burst in without knocking. "Sir, there's more. Someone's been accessing the private servers. Files are being downloaded, decades of records." Sterling's face went ashen. "Shut it down! Shut everything down!" "We can't. The access codes are executive level." "Your codes, sir? And there's something else." Wong hesitated. "The janitor and his son, they're gone. Their ID cards were used to enter the building at midnight, but security footage shows nothing." A terrible suspicion began to form in Sterling's mind. He yanked open his desk drawer, reaching for the false bottom where he kept his most damaging secrets. The compartment was empty, sir. Wong watched his boss's mounting panic with growing unease. "The partners from Shanghai are demanding answers. Mr. Chen specifically asked about—" "Don't say that name," Sterling roared. Then, more quietly, "Li Wei Chen is dead. He disappeared 20 years ago. I made sure of it. Are you certain?" Wong handed him a tablet displaying security footage from Golden Lotus Restaurant. The image showed the janitor standing tall, his accent perfect, his bearing transformed, because he looks very much alive. Sterling sank into his chair, 20 years of carefully constructed lies crumbling around him. All this time, cleaning my office, emptying my trash, listening to every conversation. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained only a photo, a jade pendant with familiar numbers carved on the back, held in a young girl's hand, Sarah Chen's hand. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, news fans were beginning to gather at the base of Sterling Tower. Police cars lined the street, their lights painting the glass facade in alternating red and blue. "The Shanghai partners want to meet now," Wong reported. "They're at your estate, waiting." "No," Sterling muttered, realization dawning. "That's what they want. They're forcing us all together. 20 years of evidence, and they want us all in one place when it breaks." He grabbed his coat, heading for the private elevator. "Get the jet ready. We're not meeting anyone. I'm not going down for—" The elevator doors opened to reveal 2 federal agents, their badges gleaming. Behind them stood Li Wei, no longers. In his janitor's uniform but wearing a crisp suit, his prosecutor's bearing restored. "Marcus Sterling," Li Wei's voice carried the weight of 20 years of patience. "I believe we need to discuss some irregularities in your Shanghai operations." Sterling backed away, reaching for his desk phone. Deadline. He tried his mobile. No signal. "Looking for your friends in high places?" Li Wei stepped forward. "They're rather busy right now, dealing with their own investigations. Amazing how. Many people will talk when the right evidence appears." Through the windows, Sterling watched helplessly as more police cars arrived. News helicopters circled the tower like vultures. On every screen in his office, the story was spreading. Photographs of the jade pendants, scanned documents, surveillance footage, bank records. "How?" he whispered. "How did you do all this?" "You gave me everything I needed," Li Wei replied calmly. "A uniform that made me invisible. Access to every floor, 20 years to learn all your secrets, but most importantly, he held up a familiar jade pendant, the cracked one James had found behind the bookshelf. "You gave us the truth, and truth, Mr. Sterling, is patient." As the federal agents moved forward with handcuffs, Sterling noticed 2 figures watching. From the doorway, James and Sarah, standing shoulder to shoulder, their jade pendants gleaming. In Sarah's face, he saw Michelle Chen's determination. In James's stance, he recognized the quiet strength that had hidden beneath Li Wei's janitor's disguise all these years. "Your empire's fallen, Mr. Sterling," Li Wei said softly. "Justice may be slow, but it never forgets." Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, catching the jade pendants and making them shine like beacons of truth in the darkness that had hidden Shanghai's secrets for so long. Sterling's carefully constructed world of power and privilege was crumbling, undone by the very people he'd thought too insignificant to notice. A janitor, 2 teenagers, and the ghost of a mother who'd trusted her daughter to carry the final key to justice. In the quiet of Li Wei's war room, Sarah held her jade pendant under a specialized scanner, watching as hidden microscopic engravings appeared on the large monitor. Beside her, Mrs. Liu dabbed tears from her eyes as decades-old memories surfaced. In the flowing Chinese characters, "Your mother was so clever," Mrs. Liu said softly. She knew they would never suspect the very tokens they used to mark their victims would become their undoing. Li Wei, still in his suit from Sterling's arrest, pulled out a heavy folder marked Operation Jade Guardian. The pages inside showed photographs of the Shanghai orphanage, blueprints, and lists of names, some crossed out, others marked with small green checks. "It began in 2003, he explained, his voice heavy with memory. Michelle was investigating money laundering through international adoptions when she noticed a pattern. Children with jade pendants were disappearing from official records, replaced by different children in the adoption papers." James leaned forward, studying a photograph of the original orphanage. Sterling's organization was using the pendants to track which children were being sold instead of legally adopted. "Yes," Li Wei confirmed. "But Michelle, your mother?" He smiled at Sarah. "She did something extraordinary. She created identical pendants, but with a difference. Each new pendant contained microscopic etchings, names, dates, transaction records, all embedded in the jade itself." Sarah touched her pendant, feeling its weight of history. "How many children did she save?" 47, Mrs. Liu answered, pulling out her own pendant. "Each of us who escaped, we carried proof of Sterling's crimes without him knowing. Your mother called us her jade witnesses. I scattered across America, waiting for the day our testimony would be needed." Li Wei brought up another document on the screen, a letter in Michelle Chen's elegant handwriting. This was her last message to me, sent just before, he paused, composing himself, "before Sterling's people poisoned her." Sarah stood, her hands trembling, as she read her mother's words. "Dearest Li Wei, they've found me, but they don't know about Sarah's pendant. It contains everything, the master key to all the records, the final proof we need. I've encoded it differently than the others, using a technique they'll never crack. My daughter will carry the truth until you're ready to use it. Keep her safe, old friend. And when the time comes, help her understand why her mother had to die for justice. The jade witnesses are ready. They've been waiting all these years, living quiet lives, building new families, but they remember. They all remember. Tell Sarah I love her. Tell her that every time she touches her pendant, she's touching my heart with hope. Michelle." The room fell silent except for Sarah's quiet sobs. James moved to her side, offering silent support as she processed the weight of her mother's sacrifice. "After Michelle died," Li Wei continued gently, "I knew I had to stay close to Sterling, watch him, gather evidence. The jade witnesses helped me create my new identity, set up our surveillance. Every person you saw at Golden Lotus restaurant yesterday, they're all connected to this story." Mrs. Liu pulled out an old photo album. Inside were pictures of smiling children, each wearing a jade pendant. "We meet every year in secret," she explained, "keeping the network alive, watching over each other's families. Your mother made us promise, if anything happened to her, we would protect you." "But why didn't you tell me sooner?" Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. "Because Sterling was watching too closely," Li Wei replied. "We needed him to think he was safe, to become careless. When you walked into his lobby with your mother's resume," he shook his head in wonder. "It was like Michelle herself was giving us the signal to begin." James studied the wall of evidence, understanding dawning. Every jade pendant is like a piece of a puzzle. Apart, they tell individual stories, but together they tell the whole truth, Li Wei finished. Sterling's entire operation, documented in fragments worn around the necks of the very children he tried to sell. Michelle Chen's final masterpiece of justice. Sarah stood, newfound strength in her posture. "Then let's finish what my mother started. Let's bring all the jade witnesses together, tell their stories to the world." "They're already gathering," Mrs. Liu smiled. "Word is spreading through the community. By tomorrow, this room will be full of people wearing jade pendants, ready to testify Li Wei placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Your mother knew this day would come. That's why she chose the pendant's design so carefully, two jade leaves intertwined. Because truth, like nature, always finds a way to grow through the darkness. Outside, cars were pulling up to the apartment building, more jade witnesses, arriving drawn by the news of Sterling's arrest, ready to add their testimonies to the growing storm of truth. Sarah touched her pendant one last time, feeling not its weight but its strength. The strength of a mother's love, a prosecutor's dedication, and a community's unbreakable spirit. The evening news broadcast flickered across every screen in Sterling Tower's executive boardroom, where Charles Wang watched his empire crumble in real time. Breaking news: international trafficking ring exposed. Sterling Industries CEO Marcus. Sterling arrested. Sources reveal decades of criminal activity linked to Shanghai orphanage scandal. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Board members demanding explanations, shareholders panic selling, journalists hungry for comments. But it was the calls from Shanghai that terrified him most. Terse messages from powerful men who didn't tolerate loose ends. Sir, his assistant interrupted, face pale. Federal agents are sealing off the Shanghai office, and there's something else. She handed him a tablet showing security footage from the building's basement. They found a hidden room behind the maintenance closet. The footage showed investigators removing boxes of documents, hard drives, and most damning of all, a cabinet full of jade pendants, each one tagged and numbered like evidence in a museum of horrors. Li Wei, Wang muttered, finally understanding. He didn't just clean our offices, he was cataloging everything, every meeting, every transaction, every scrap of paper we thought we'd destroyed. On another screen, a press conference was beginning. Outside the federal courthouse, Li Wei stood at the podium, no longer in janitor's clothes, but wearing the confident bearing of a prosecutor who'd waited 20 years for this moment. Beside him, Sarah Chen held her pendant up for the cameras, its jade surface catching the light like a beacon of truth. The pendants were never just inventory tags, Li Wei was saying, his voice carrying 2 decades of carefully contained fury. They were keys to a locked room of evidence. Each survivor who escaped carried proof of Sterling's crimes around their neck, waiting for the day justice would finally listen. The boardroom door burst open as federal agents entered, warrant in hand. But Wang barely noticed them. His attention was fixed on the crowd gathering behind Li Wei. Dozens of people, young and old, each wearing a jade pendant. Their faces told a story Sterling had tried to bury, children who'd survived, parents who'd searched, families torn apart and rebuilt. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from Sterling, already in custody. Burn everything. But it was too late. Down in the maintenance office, Li Wei's hidden command center for 20 years, Sarah and James were already uploading the last of the files. Every security camera feed, every recorded conversation, every photographed document was streaming to news outlets and law enforcement agencies worldwide. Mr. Wang, a federal agent, approached. We need to discuss your involvement in the Shanghai operations. Through the boardroom's windows, he watched as more news vans arrived, their satellite dishes raised like accusing fingers toward Sterling Tower. On the streets below, a crowd was gathering, more people wearing jade pendants drawn by the harsh news coming to add their testimonies to the growing avalanche of truth. His assistant appeared again, looking shell-shocked. Sir, the Shanghai partners, they're talking, all of them, trying to cut deals with authorities, and someone leaked the poison formula used on Michelle Chen. The laboratories have confirmed it matches her autopsy results. Wang sank into Sterling's custom leather chair, the same chair from which his boss had orchestrated 2 decades of crimes. On every screen, the story kept growing. Offshore accounts frozen, adoption records unsealed, former employees coming forward with new evidence. They never needed a smoking gun, he realized aloud. They just needed us to think we were safe enough to get sloppy. 20 years of playing janitor, he was inside our operation the whole time, documenting everything. The federal agents began boxing up hard drives and files, but Wang knew the real evidence had never been in the boardroom. It had been walking around the city all these years, hanging from the necks of survivors who'd carried their truth patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to speak. His phone buzzed one last time, a video link from an unknown number. He clicked it, knowing what he'd see, but unable to resist. There was Lee Wei, methodically cleaning Sterling's office late at night, his hidden camera recording every late-night call, every secret meeting, every damning confession they'd thought was private. When you've been invisible long enough, Lee. Wei's voice came through clearly. People forget you're there. They forget that even walls have ears, that every shadow might hold a witness, that truth is patient but unstoppable. As the agents led him away, Wong caught a final glimpse of the news broadcast. The camera had pulled back to show the full crowd outside the courthouse, hundreds of people now, many wearing jade pendants that caught the setting sun like stars, of justice finally rising in a dark sky. Sterling had built his empire on secrets and silence, but in the end, it was undone by the quiet determination of a janitor who had spent 20 years gathering proof, a young girl carrying her mother's last testimony, and a network of survivors who'd never forgotten the weight of jade against their hearts. The federal interrogation room felt smaller by the minute as David Chen, no relation to Li Wei despite the shared surname, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. After 20 years as Sterling's partner in Shanghai, he'd finally broken under. The weight of accumulated evidence. Before him sat photographs of jade pendants, each one a silent accusation. Start from the beginning, the federal prosecutor said, sliding him a photograph of a younger Marcus Sterling shaking hands with officials outside the Golden Dragon Orphanage. In the observation room, Sarah pressed her hand against the glass, watching her mother's killer finally speak his truth. Li Wei stood beside her, recording every word, while James took careful notes. It was Michelle Chen who first suspected something was wrong, David began, his voice barely above a whisper. She noticed discrepancies in the adoption papers, children who seemed to appear and disappear from records. She started tracking the jade pendants we used to mark the merchandise. Sarah's fingers tightened around her own pendant as David continued. Sterling had connections everywhere: police, judges, immigration officials. The jade pendant system was his idea, each one coded with information about the child's value. He swallowed hard. But Michelle, she was brilliant. She didn't just investigate, she infiltrated. Created duplicate pendants with microscopic evidence embedded in the jade itself. How many children were involved? The prosecutor asked. Hundreds, maybe thousands. We thought we were untouchable. David's hands trembled as he reached for the water glass. When Michelle and Li Wei got too close, Sterling ordered, "Say it." Li Wei's voice crackled through the intercom, making David jump. "Tell her daughter how you murdered Michelle Chen." David's eyes found Sarah through the glass, seeing Michelle's determination in her daughter's stance. The poison was designed to mimic aggressive cancer. Sterling's chemists in Shanghai developed it specifically for problems that needed to disappear quietly. Michelle knew we were coming for her, but she refused to run. Sarah felt James's hand slip into hers as David revealed the final pieces of her mother's story. She stayed because she was building a network. Every child who escaped, every family who made it to America, she connected them all. The Jade Witnesses, she called them. Even after we thought we'd silenced her, her plan kept working. The evidence kept spreading, one pendant at a time. In his suit pocket, David pulled out a jade pendant of his own. "She gave me this the day before we poisoned her. Said someday I'd need to choose between truth and power." He placed it on the table, hands shaking. "I'm choosing now." The pendant's surface was different from the others, carved with a pattern of interconnected circles that Sarah recognized from her mother's notebook. Li Wei stepped forward, eyes wide with recognition. "The master key," he breathed. "Michelle told me she'd hidden it with someone who'd break when the moment was right. Someone whose guilt would eventually become unbearable." David nodded miserably. "Every other pendant contains fragments of evidence. But this one has the cipher key, the pattern that connects all the pieces. She knew I'd keep it. thinking it was just a trophy. Knew my conscience would eventually... He couldn't finish. Sarah watched as 20 years of guilt collapsed. Into tears? Your mother, David managed finally, looking at Sarah. She told me something the last time I saw her. Said that jade doesn't just reflect light. It transforms it. Changes darkness into something beautiful. I didn't understand then. But watching all these people coming forward, wearing their pendants like badges of survival, I understand. Now, Leeway pressed a button, signaling the prosecutor to continue the official testimony. But Sarah had heard enough. In the hallway outside, she leaned against the wall, processing everything she'd learned about her mother's incredible foresight and courage. She knew, Sarah whispered, she knew she wouldn't survive, so she created a network that would. A web of truth that would keep growing even after she was gone. James squeezed her hand. Your mom turned their weapon into her shield. Every pendant they used to mark their victims became proof of their crimes instead. And now the final key, Leeway added softly. With David's pendant, we can decode everything. Every transaction, every name, every connection hidden in the Jade Witness's pendants. Michelle Chen's last gift to justice. Through the hallway window, Sarah could see more Jade Witnesses arriving at the federal building, drawn by news of David's confession. Each pendant caught the light differently, but together they created a constellation of truth that had finally broken through 20 years of darkness. Mom knew that true justice can't be rushed, Sarah said, touching her pendant one last time. It has to be grown, nurtured, protected, until it's strong enough to stand on its own. Like jade, she thought. Patient, enduring, and ultimately unbreakable. Golden Lotus Restaurant had transformed from a humble eatery into the command center of a revolution. Every table was filled with Jade Witnesses, their pendants gleaming under the lantern light as they shared their stories with federal investigators. Mr. Wong had opened his doors to them all, serving endless pots of tea as 2 decades of silence finally broke into a flood of testimony. Sarah moved among them, her mother's red notebook in hand, matching names to faces, connecting fragments of a story that spanned continents. James worked beside her, documenting everything on his laptop while Leeway coordinated with authorities. Look at this, James called her over, pointing to his screen. I've mapped every Jade Witness who's come forward so far. They're not random. Your mom arranged them in cells, like a resistance network. Each group settled in the same neighborhoods, watched over each other's children, kept the evidence alive. Sarah studied the map, seeing her mother's brilliant strategy unfold. She created a living archive. Even if Sterling found some of us, he could never find everyone. The truth was too distributed, too protected. The restaurant's door chimed as more survivors arrived. A young woman about Sarah's age approached, her pendant marking her as one of the original orphans. I'm Lynn May, she said softly. Your mother. She carried me on her back when we escaped the orphanage. I was only 3, but I remember her singing to keep me quiet as we ran. More stories emerged as the day progressed. A former orphanage worker described how Michelle had systematically replaced the original jade pendants with her encoded versions. A retired customs officer admitted to helping her smuggle children to safety, hidden in shipping containers that Sterling's own company unwittingly transported. We're trending worldwide, Jenny announced from behind the counter, her phone displaying endless social media updates. Jade Witnesses and Sterling crimes are the top hashtags. People are sharing their stories everywhere. Leeway stepped onto a chair, commanding the room's attention. Sterling's preliminary hearing is tomorrow. His lawyers are trying to paint this as a simple adoption irregularity, a paperwork mistake. We need every witness ready to show the true scale of his crimes. They're also claiming the jade pendants are inadmissible, James added, saying they're just jewelry, not evidence. But with David Chen's master key pendant, we can prove the encodings are real, Sarah finished. She touched her own pendant, remembering her mother's words about truth being transformed, like light through jade. But it's not just about the physical evidence anymore. Look around. Every person here is living proof of what Sterling did. The afternoon sun threw patterns through the restaurant's jade-colored glass panels, creating a gentle green light that seemed to strengthen every resolve, illuminate every truth. Mr. Wong moved through the crowd, his chef's apron replaced by a suit that matched his newfound dignity. Sterling's people are still out there, he warned, setting down fresh tea. They've been calling, offering money for silence, but they don't understand. We're not afraid anymore. Fear can't survive in the light of so much truth. As if in response to his words, a black SUV crawled past the restaurant's windows. Sarah recognized Charles Wong at the wheel, Sterling's head of security looking desperately for weakness in their unified front. But instead of shrinking from his gaze, the jade witnesses turned to face the window, dozens of pendants catching the light in a silent show of strength. They always saw us as separate pieces, Sarah told the room, her voice carrying her mother's strength. Isolated victims they could intimidate or buy off. But Mom knew better. She built us into a community. Every pendant is connected to every other pendant. We're not just witnesses anymore. We're a family. James stood beside her, their shoulders touching. Tomorrow, when Sterling faces the court, he won't just be facing charges. He'll be facing every life he tried to destroy, every truth he tried to bury. Li Wei watched the scene with quiet pride, seeing his old friend Michelle's vision finally realized. The jade witnesses weren't just survivors now. They were advocates, storytellers, justice seekers. Each one carried a piece of the truth, but together they formed an unbreakable wall of testimony. As evening fell, more people gathered. Outside Golden Lotus, local residents brought food and supplies. Journalists respectfully collected stories. Federal agents provided security. The revolution Michelle Chen had planted 20 years ago with jade pendants and encoded truth was finally blooming, unstoppable as spring after a long winter. Sarah and James worked late into the night, preparing testimonies, organizing evidence, strengthening the bonds between witnesses. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in this transformed restaurant, glowing with jade light and shared purpose, justice felt as real and solid as the pendants they wore. Your mother would be proud, Li Wei told Sarah softly. She turned his tools of oppression into our badges of resistance. Tomorrow Sterling will finally understand what she built right under his nose. An army of truth, armed with jade and memory. The federal courthouse steps swarmed with media as Marcus Sterling, impeccable despite his handcuffs, was led through a gauntlet of cameras and accusations. His trademark confidence wavered only once, when he saw the crowd waiting and silent. Judgment, hundreds of jade pendants gleaming in the morning sun. Li Wei stood at the top of the steps, no longer invisible in his janitor's uniform, but commanding in his prosecutor's suit. Sarah and James flanked him, their pendants catching the light like beacons. Behind them, row upon row of jade witnesses created a wall of unified testimony. Mr. Sterling, a reporter called out, what do you say to allegations that you ran an international trafficking ring through the Golden Dragon Orphanage? Sterling's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. These accusations are absurd. I ran a legitimate adoption agency that helped hundreds of children find loving homes. This is clearly a coordinated attack by competitors trying to destroy my reputation. Is that why you poisoned my mother? Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, clear and strong. The camera swung toward her as she descended the steps, her pendant swaying with each deliberate move. Michelle Chen, the lawyer who discovered your jade pendant tracking system. The woman you murdered to keep your secrets. Safe. Sterling's facade cracked slightly. I never knew your mother. These accusations are, let me refresh your memory. Li Wei's voice carried the weight of 20 years of patience. He nodded to James, who activated a massive screen erected on the courthouse wall. Sterling's own voice filled the air. Chen woman's becoming a problem. Handle it like we handled her mother. The same poison. Make it look natural. The recording, crystal clear after years of hidden surveillance, drew gasps from the crowd. Sterling's face drained of color as he recognized the conversation from his own office, a conversation he'd had while his ever-present janitor quietly cleaned in the background. You, Sterling whispered, finally seeing Li Wei clearly. All. These years, Prosecutor Li Wei Chin, he announced, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. The man you thought you'd silenced 20 years ago. I traded my suit for a janitor's uniform, my name for an alias, but I never stopped gathering evidence. Every meeting you held, every call you made, every document you thought you destroyed, I was there, watching, recording, waiting. Shop. The Bahad crowd of jade witnesses moved forward as one, their pendants creating a constellation of truth around Sterling's crumbling empire. From the courthouse doors emerged David Chen, now a federal witness, carrying the master key pendant that would decode them all? Your own system convicted you, Sarah continued, her mother's strength flowing through her words. Each pendant you used to track children became a piece of evidence. My mother made sure of that before you killed her. Sterling lunged suddenly, breaking free from his escorts. But he found himself facing a solid wall of jade witnesses, each pendant a testament to his crimes. Mr. Wong stepped forward, his chef's apron replaced by a suit that matched his restored dignity. You threatened my restaurant, he said calmly, but you never saw what it really was. A gathering place for survivors, a keeper of truth, a link in a chain you couldn't break. You're nothing, Sterling shouted, his composure shattering completely. A janitor, a dead lawyer's brat, a bunch of peasants with cheap jewelry. You can't touch me. I have connections. I have power. You have nothing, Li Wei interrupted, removing his jade pendant, the original one he'd worn as a prosecutor in Shanghai. Your connections have abandoned you. Your partner has confessed. Your empire is falling. And all that's left is the truth you tried to bury. Federal agents moved to restrain Sterling, but he remained fixated on the sea of jade witnesses. Each face triggered a memory. Children he'd treated as commodities, families he'd torn apart, loves he'd tried to destroy. But they hadn't been destroyed. They'd grown stronger, gathered evidence, waited for justice. 20 years, Li Wei continued, addressing both Sterling and the watching world. 20 years of cleaning your floors, emptying your trash, staying invisible while I documented every crime. Michelle Chen created the Jade Witness Network, and I protected it from within your own tower. Today, justice finally rises from the shadows. The morning sun reached its peak, sending rays of light through hundreds of jade pendants. Each one caught the light differently, but together they created an undeniable illumination of truth. Sterling, finally understanding the full scope of his defeat, sagged in the agent's grip. Sarah stepped forward one last time, holding up her pendant. My mother said jade doesn't just reflect light. It transforms it, changes darkness into something beautiful. That's what we did with your weapons, Mr. Sterling. We transformed them into our strength. As Sterling was led away, the jade witnesses began sharing their stories with the waiting media. Each pendant held a piece of evidence, each survivor carried a thread of truth. And together they wove a tapestry of justice that no power or privilege could unravel. Li Wei placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, seeing his old friend Michelle's courage shining in her daughter's eyes. "Ready to tell your story?" he asked softly. Sarah nodded, touching her pendant one last time. "Mom's story," she corrected. "And yours. And everyone's. It's all one story now." The verdict echoed through the packed courtroom like a thunderclap. Marcus Sterling, on all counts of human trafficking, conspiracy, murder, and obstruction of justice, this court finds you guilty. The judge's gavel fell with the weight of 20 years of waiting, and the jade witnesses rose as one, their pendants catching the afternoon light streaming through the high windows. Sterling, his expensive suit now wrinkled from weeks in custody, seemed to shrink in his chair as the judge continued reading the sentencing recommendations. Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. His empire of lies, built on the backs of trafficked children and murdered truth-seekers, was finally crumbling to dust. Outside the courthouse, Sarah stood before a forest of microphones, her voice steady as she addressed the world. Today isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about the power of patience, the strength of community, and the undeniable force of truth. My mother, Michelle Chen, planted the seeds of justice 20 years ago. Today, we harvest what she grew. The media had dubbed it the Jade Witness. Trial and its impact rippled across continents. In Shanghai, authorities were reopening hundreds of adoption cases. Sterling's international partners were falling like dominoes, their own crimes exposed by the evidence encoded in the jade pendants. Li Wei, no longer hidden in a janitor's uniform, worked tirelessly with federal prosecutors to expand the investigation. His 2 decades of gathered evidence had opened doors that many thought permanently sealed. In his old maintenance office, now transformed into a command center, he and James sorted through years of surveillance footage. "Look at this," James called out, pointing to his screen. Sterling's network wasn't just about adoptions. They were using the same channels for money laundering, corporate espionage, political bribes. He shook his head in amazement. "You documented everything." "Your father was incredibly thorough," Sarah added, entering with a fresh stack of depositions. "Every night for 20 years, while they thought he was just cleaning, he was really building an airtight case." Li Wei smiled softly, touching his jade pendant. "I had help. Every survivor who kept their pendant, every family who stayed connected, every person who remembered, they were all part of Michelle's plan." She knew. That truth, like jade, becomes stronger under pressure. The Golden Lotus restaurant had become a symbol of resistance and renewal. Mr. Wong had transformed it into a community center for survivors and their families. The walls, once bare, now displayed photographs of jade witnesses reuniting with lost relatives, healing old wounds, building new connections. "Sterling's lawyers have filed an appeal," Jenny announced, bringing in the morning newspapers. "They're still claiming the jade pendants aren't admissible evidence." "Let them appeal," Mrs. Liu said firmly, serving tea to a group of survivors giving their testimonies to human rights investigators. "The evidence isn't just in the jade anymore. It's in our stories, our scars, our survival." The investigation was expanding beyond Sterling's immediate circle. Corporate boards were being reshuffled, political allies were stepping down, and international adoption agencies were undergoing intense scrutiny. The Jade Witness's testimony had triggered a global reckoning. David Chen, now a key witness for the prosecution, worked to unravel the financial web he'd helped build. Each revelation led to more arrests, more confessions, more justice. The poison used on Michelle Chen was traced to its source, leading to the arrest of Sterling's Shanghai chemists. Sarah spent her evenings in the apartment she now shared with Mrs. Liu, reading through her mother's old case notes with new understanding. The red notebook that had seemed so mysterious now read like a master plan for justice, patient, methodical, unstoppable. "Your mother would be proud," Mrs. Liu said softly, watching Sarah work. She knew the Jade Witnesses would need a leader. When the time came, she raised you to be strong enough for this moment. James, who had been helping Sarah organize the survivors' stories, looked up from his laptop. "The international media is calling it the biggest human trafficking bust in history. Sterling's conviction is just the beginning." "Good," Sarah replied, touching her pendant. "Because this was never just about Sterling. Mom and Li Wei were fighting something bigger, a system that treated children like commodities and truth like an inconvenience." The evening news played, quietly in the background, showing footage of more arrests, more Jade Witnesses coming forward, more evidence emerging from the shadows. Sterling's face appeared briefly, a mug shot now, stripped of power and privilege, his carefully constructed world reduced to a prison cell. But the true power was in the scenes that followed. Jade Witnesses testifying before congressional committees, survivors reuniting with long-lost siblings, community centers opening their doors to help heal 2 decades of wounds. The justice Michelle Chen had envisioned wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, restoration, renewal. Truth, like jade, reflects light differently depending on how you hold it, Li Wei had told the court during his testimony. Sterling saw these pendants as chains to bind children. Michelle Chen transformed them into keys to unlock justice. Today, they shine as badges of survival, symbols of a community that refused to be silenced. The sun set over the city, its rays catching hundreds of jade pendants worn openly now, proudly. Each one told a story of survival. Each one held a piece of evidence, and together they had finally brought light to 20 years of darkness. The Sterling Tower's transformation happened gradually, like healing itself. The golden letters of the corrupt empire had been removed, replaced by a simple jade-colored sign. The Phoenix Center, home of the Jade Witness Foundation, where Marcus Sterling had once plotted his crimes, survivors now found healing, connection, and purpose. Sarah stood in what had been Sterling's private office, now a warm counseling space filled with soft light and gentle voices. The wall that had once displayed Sterling's awards now held photographs of reunited families, each wearing their jade pendants with pride. Below them, a plaque bore Michelle Chen's words, "Truth, like jade, becomes stronger under pressure." The latest numbers are in, James announced, entering with his laptop. "We've helped reunite 37 families this month alone. The DNA database is growing, and more survivors are coming forward every day." Li Wei, who now served as the Foundation's legal director, looked up from a stack of case files. "And the international team? They've identified 3 more trafficking networks using Sterling's old routes," James replied. "The Jade Witness testimony model is being implemented globally. Organizations in 5 countries have adopted our pendant documentation system." Sarah touched her own pendant, remembering how its weight had once felt like a burden. Now it was a symbol of transformation, a key that continued to unlock doors for others seeking justice and healing. The Foundation's work extended far beyond the original case. The community center at Golden Lotus Restaurant had expanded into a full city block offering everything from trauma counseling to legal aid. Mr. Wong's kitchen still served his famous dumplings, but now they nourished survivors sharing their stories, lawyers building cases, and families rebuilding broken bonds. "Ms. Chen?" A young woman appeared in the doorway, her jade pendant newly issued by the Foundation. "The support group is ready." To begin, Sarah followed her to a room where a circle of chairs held people of all ages, each wearing a pendant that caught the light differently. Some were original survivors from Sterling's orphanage. Others were more recent rescues from networks they'd helped expose. All were part of the growing Phoenix family, as they called themselves, risen from the ashes of trauma to help others fly. "My mother believed that healing happens in circles, not lines," Sarah began, as she did every session. "That's why she designed the Jade Witness Network the way she did, connected, supporting, strengthening each other." The stories shared in that circle carried both pain and power. A teenage boy, recently reunited with his birth family, spoke of learning to trust again. An elderly woman described finding her granddaughter through the Foundation's DNA program. A young mother revealed how her own rescue had inspired her to become a counselor. In his office down the hall, Li Wei continued his patient work of justice. The evidence he'd gathered as a janitor was still yielding results, leading to arrests, reforms, and systemic changes. But now he worked in the light, his prosecutor's credentials restored, his mission expanded from vengeance to healing. "We found another one," James told him, pulling up a security feed. "A cleaning service in Singapore using the same model Sterling did, hiding trafficking operations behind legitimate businesses." Li Wei nodded grimly. "Alert our partners in the region. The Jade Witness Protocol knows no borders." The Foundation had developed what they called the Phoenix Protocol, a comprehensive system for documenting abuse, protecting survivors, and building cases that could withstand any legal challenge. At its heart was the Jade Pendant Program, but evolved from Michelle Chen's original design. Each pendant now contained digital tracking, encrypted data, and direct links to support services. "Your mother would be amazed," Mrs. Liu told Sarah during their weekly dinner at Golden Lotus. "She planted seeds of justice, but you've grown them into a forest of healing." The restaurant hummed with activity, support groups sharing meals, lawyers discussing cases, families celebrating reunions. The jade-colored glass panels that had once hidden, frightened witnesses now sparkled with pride and purpose. Sarah watched a young girl receive her pendant, marking her successful rescue and entry into the Foundation's protection program. The child's eyes widened at the stone's beauty, not yet understanding its deeper significance. But she would learn, as they all had, that the pendant was more than jewelry. It was membership in a family forged by survival and strengthened by truth. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah confided to James as they worked late into the evening, "if Mom somehow saw all this coming. If she knew her Jade Witness Network would grow into something so much bigger than one case." James smiled, taking her hand. "She gave you the tools you needed, courage, truth, and a pendant that could unlock justice. But what you've built with it, what all of you have created here," he gestured to the bustling Foundation headquarters. "This is something new, something powerful." Through the windows of the Phoenix Center, the city lights sparkled like countless jade pendants, each one holding its own story of darkness transformed into light. The Foundation's work was far from over, but with each passing day, more survivors found their way home, more truth came to light, and more healing transformed pain into purpose. Michelle Chen's legacy lived on, not just in the pendant around her daughter's neck, but in every life touched by the phoenix that had risen from the ashes of Sterling's empire. The Jade Witnesses had become Jade Warriors, their truth-telling transformed into truth-healing, their survival strengthened by solidarity. 1 year later, Sarah stood before a full auditorium at the International Justice Summit, her jade pendant catching the spotlight as she addressed delegates from around the world. Behind her, a giant screen displayed the Phoenix Center's global impact. Thousands of survivors helped, hundreds of trafficking networks exposed, dozens of corrupt officials brought to justice. "My mother once told me that jade doesn't just reflect light, it transforms it," she began, her voice carrying Michelle Chen's strength. "Today, I understand what she meant. Each pendant in our network isn't just a piece of evidence or a symbol of survival. It's a transformer of darkness into light, of pain into purpose, of silence into truth." In the front row, Li Wei sat beside his son, both wearing their pendants proudly. The former janitor had recently been appointed to head an international task force on trafficking prevention, his 20 years of gathered evidence becoming a blueprint for global justice. "The Jade Witness Network my mother created wasn't just about bringing down one criminal empire," Sarah continued. "It was about building something new in its place, something that could never be corrupted or silenced, because its strength lies not in power or money, but in the unbreakable bonds between survivors." The Phoenix Center had expanded beyond its original mission. Where Sterling Tower once stood as a monument to greed, a network of healing centers now spread across continents. Each one incorporated elements of jade in its design, a reminder that beauty could emerge from darkness, that pressure could create strength. James, now the Foundation's technology director, had developed a secure global database linking all Jade Witness cases. Every pendant issued by the Foundation contained a QR code connecting survivors to immediate support services, legal aid, and their extended Phoenix family. "Last week," Sarah shared with the audience, "we reunited our 1,000th family. A mother and daughter separated by Sterling's organization 17 years ago found each other through our DNA program. But more importantly, they found a community ready to help them heal." The screen behind her showed the reunion, 2 women embracing while wearing matching jade pendants, surrounded by supporting survivors who understood their journey. The image dissolved into a montage of similar moments, children meeting siblings. For the first time, elderly parents finding long-lost sons and daughters, families made whole again. The Jade Witnesses were never meant to be just witnesses, Sarah explained. We were meant to be transformers. Every pendant in our network carries not just evidence of crimes, but proof of resilience, not just memories of trauma, but hope for healing. In the Golden Lotus restaurant, now the heart of a thriving community center, Mr. Wong had trained dozens of survivors in his culinary arts program. The restaurant's jade-colored windows had become famous. People said, the light filtering through. Them had healing properties, though Sarah suspected it was the sense of community within that truly healed. Marcus Sterling thought he could bury the truth, she continued, her voice strong with conviction. He thought jade pendants could be used to mark human beings as merchandise. But my mother, Michelle Chen, knew better. She knew that truth, like jade, only becomes more beautiful under pressure, more valuable with time, more powerful when shaped by patient hands. Li Wei joined her on stage for the summit's closing ceremony. Together, they unveiled the foundation's next phase, a global educational initiative ensuring that the Jade Witness story would be taught in schools, preventing future generations from falling victim to trafficking networks. My friend Michelle once told me that justice is not a destination, but a journey. Li Wei addressed the crowd. She said true justice doesn't seek revenge, but transformation. Today, every jade pendant in our network represents that transformation, from victim to survivor, from survivor to advocate, from advocate to healer. As the summit concluded, Sarah found herself in the Phoenix Center's Memorial Garden. A jade sculpture of a rising phoenix marked the spot where Sterling Tower's logo had once dominated the skyline. At its base, hundreds of jade pendants had been embedded in the foundation, surrendered by survivors who'd found healing, transformed into a permanent reminder of their collective strength. James found her there, as he often did, contemplating the legacy they now carried forward. Your mom would be proud, he said softly, taking her hand, not just of what you've done, but of who you've become. Sarah touched her pendant, feeling its familiar weight, no longer a burden of secret evidence, but a badge of hard-won wisdom. She knew the pendants would connect us, she replied, but I don't think even she could have imagined how far that connection would spread. As evening fell, the Phoenix Center glowed with jade-colored light, a beacon for those still finding their way to healing. Inside, support groups shared their stories, lawyers built cases against new threats, and survivors transformed their experiences into strength for others. The Jade Witnesses had become more than their name suggested. They were no longer just testifying to past crimes, but building a future where such crimes would find no shadow to hide in, no silence to grow in, no darkness to thrive in. In the end, Michelle Chen's greatest legacy wasn't the evidence she'd hidden in jade, but the network of healing she'd woven between survivors. Each pendant still told a story, but now those stories weren't just about what had been endured. They were about what had been overcome, what had been transformed, what had been healed. And in that transformation, like light through jade, darkness had become something beautiful,